Hi, it's Vernon again. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the 3 types of older women, especially after 60, who unsettle men the most. Not because they're difficult, but because they challenge a man's sense of control, his confidence, even his identity. Over the years, I've come to realize something most men will never admit, that certain older women don't just unsettle them, they unmask them. Not because these women are loud or demanding, but because they are clear in their presence, in their boundaries, and in their refusal to chase approval. And for many men, that quiet clarity is quietly terrifying. As Carl Jung once wrote, men go to war with themselves when confronted by a woman who no longer needs them to feel complete. Older women often carry that kind of quiet autonomy. It challenges a man's role, his value, even his identity, and in that reflection, many men find no admiration, but fear. But before we begin, if these reflections speak to something inside you, don't hesitate to like, share, and subscribe. This space is for those who still believe that with years come not just memories, but meaning. Let's begin. Let's take a closer look at the first type of older woman who quietly shakes the foundation of a man's confidence, often without saying a word. Type 1. The woman who speaks with calm certainty. She doesn't argue, she doesn't raise her voice, and yet, when she speaks, people listen, not out of fear, but because her words carry weight. That presence is not loud, but it is firm, the kind that comes only from having faced herself honestly over decades. She knows the cost of silence and the weight of words. And for many men, especially those who've built their identity on control or certainty, that calm presence is quietly unsettling. It's like meeting a still mountain after a life of racing rivers. There is a kind of woman whose strength is not reactive, but rooted. She does not resist to prove power. She simply is power, grounded in self-knowing. And that is a confrontation most men are unprepared for. Not because she attacks them, but because she does not yield to them. There's no drama, no seduction, no need to be liked, only depth, only stillness. And in that stillness, a man is faced with himself. It is not a power you can win over. It is one you must learn to respect. And for many, that is a lesson they spend their whole lives avoiding. I think back often to my ex-wife, Helen. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she had this unshakable presence. When we'd argue, she wouldn't try to win. She'd just ask one clear, pointed question, and it would land harder than any raised voice. I remember the way I used to feel disarmed in her presence, not because she was unkind, but because she saw through the noise. She saw me, even the parts I hadn't yet faced in myself, and she never tried to control the room, but somehow it always bent around her calm. Looking back, I realize now how much of my own ego was unsettled by her quiet certainty. And that's the heart of it. Men are often trained to perform, to impress, to dominate the room. But when faced with a woman who no longer plays that game, who listens more than she speaks and who isn't impressed by bravado, the ego stumbles. Especially when that woman embodies traits traditionally seen as masculine: authority, self-possession, clarity without compromise. As Camille Paglia once noted, a woman who commands space with masculine energy, unfiltered by charm, is seen not as powerful, but as threatening. And that's the paradox. She doesn't try to take control. She simply doesn't surrender it. It's not hostility. It's not defiance. It's simply grounded wisdom. And for a man who hasn't yet made peace with himself, that can be unnerving. So what happens when a woman no longer performs to please, no longer needs validation, and no longer makes room for fragile pride? Many men step back. But not all powerful women are still. Some carry their strength not in silence, but in motion, in solitude, in the way they walk through the world untouched by its noise. Let's now look at the second kind of woman, the one who walks alone, yet is never lonely. Type 2. The woman who complains, controls, and criticizes. She's the kind of older woman many men quietly avoid, not because she's strong, but because she drains the space around her. Her words don't invite conversation, they dominate it. Her presence doesn't ground others, it commands them. And her stories, often about what's wrong, what should be different, who disappointed her, leave no room for warmth or connection. This type of woman often carries the residue of unresolved resentment, maybe from relationships, maybe from the world. But instead of turning that pain into wisdom, she sharpens it into weapons, complaints, corrections, judgments. And while she may believe she's simply being honest or keeping things real, what others feel is distance, a coldness masked as strength. As Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than necessary." And some women, like some men, carry old wounds not as lessons, but as proof. Proof that the world is unjust, that people will always fail them, that control is the only way to stay safe, but that armor, worn too long, begins to rust from within. Engaging with her is like stepping into a room filled with mirrors that only reflect what's wrong. The lighting too dim, the furniture too old, the conversation never quite right. She's the type of woman who walks into a gathering and within minutes turns warmth into tension, presence into performance. To many men, being around her feels like being on trial. No matter what you say, there will be a correction, a better version, a dismissive glance. It's not a dialogue, it's a constant audit. And so, over time, they stop showing up, not because they can't handle the truth, but because they're tired of never being enough. The fear here isn't about her competence, it's about her refusal to soften, to connect without control. And for many men, especially those already weary from life, it's easier to keep a safe distance than to try to break through the armor of a woman who's forgotten how to simply be. What about you? When you hear about this kind of presence, do you recognize someone, or perhaps a part of yourself? I'd be honored to read your reflections in the comments. Sometimes, one thoughtful observation opens a door not just for me, but for others quietly listening. Let's learn from each other, one quiet truth at a time. Let's turn now to a different kind of presence, the one whose confidence wears a different face. Elegance, intellect, and ease. But beneath that grace lies a quiet challenge that many men never see coming. Type 3. The woman who no longer fears loss. There is a rare kind of strength in a woman who has lost and survived. She has buried love, walked away from betrayal, held space for grief, and still greets the morning with both feet on the ground. She does not cling, she does not chase, because she knows everything in life is temporary, including pain, including love. And that kind of peace, that kind of detachment, is something many men do not know how to hold. When a woman no longer fears being left, when she has already lived through loneliness and learned how to turn it into solitude, she becomes free in a way that feels dangerous to those still bound by need. She is not hardened, but she is no longer fragile. She has cried her share of tears and buried the parts of her that begged for permanence in a world that promises none. And now she holds space, not people. She welcomes love, but she doesn't grip it. This part reminds me about my mother. She lost my father, her younger brother, and the home they built together, all in the span of just a few years. Yet never once did she let bitterness take root. When she spoke about those losses, it wasn't to dwell in sorrow, but to share what remained: resilience, grace, and the wisdom to carry on. Her voice never trembled, not because she didn't feel, but because she had already made peace with her pain. She made no demands of anyone, and yet, being near her felt like standing beside an ancient tree unshaken by storms, unmoved by flattery. Men were drawn to her, and quietly unnerved. One of them was an older neighbor of ours, a kind man I've long admired. He once confided in me, in a moment of soft honesty, that he had deep affection for my mother. Truthfully, a part of me wished they could find companionship in each other, to grow old with gentleness and shared mornings. But he said something that has stayed with me. She's remarkable, but it feels like nothing could ever truly reach her. It wasn't sadness in his voice, it was awe. Because how do you protect someone who does not need your protection? How do you impress someone who values presence more than promises? As the Stoic Epictetus once wrote, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." A woman like Lydia lives that wisdom. She doesn't mourn the past, nor hunger for what's next. She simply breathes, and that is enough. And for many men, especially those who define worth by what they can offer, she presents a quiet terror. They cannot give her what she has already given herself: peace. Perhaps what unsettles us most isn't her strength, but her stillness, the kind that says, "I've already walked through fire, and I am no longer afraid to stand alone." In her, we see a version of ourselves we may never reach, and that quiet knowing, that is what lingers. Conclusion: what men fear in older women is rarely about the women themselves. It is about what they awaken, not in noise, but in silence. A life lived fully, choices made without apology, a presence that no longer seeks permission. These women carry the gravity of truth, that time, when faced with courage, polishes the soul rather than dims it. They are not mirrors to vanity, but to vulnerability. And in their reflection, we are reminded of the parts of ourselves still afraid to be whole, the unlived questions, the roles we've worn too long, the fragile hopes of being needed to feel valuable. But fear, when met with humility, becomes a doorway. To the men watching, these women are not here to compete with you. They are here to remind you, gently, powerfully, that maturity is not measured by what you control, but by what you've let go of, by how deeply you've listened, by how honestly you've loved. And to the women watching, your presence is not too much. It is the medicine many don't yet know they need. Stand tall in your clarity. Walk gently in your power. You are not feared because you are wrong. You are feared because you are free. As the poet David White once said, "The courageous conversation is the one you're not having." So perhaps today, it's time to have that conversation, not with others, but with ourselves. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found value in this reflection, don't forget to subscribe, share, and keep the dialogue going. Because with each story told, we soften another shadow. This is Vernon. Until next time, stay wise, stay kind, and stay deeply human. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.